All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Bethany. I am a financial aid specialist here on Going Mary's team. I'm also basically partner with the schools and help them understand how to use Going Mary and understand financial aid, answer questions for families, all that kind of good stuff as well. Today, we are going to cover basically everything you can think of in terms of financial aid. We're going to kind of run the gambit. I did see a lot of questions submitted in advance, so I will make sure to answer those at the end, along with those questions submitted throughout the presentation as well. Um, if you've never heard of Going Mary, our platform is a free financial aid access platform. We help with everything from like figuring out what college you want to go to and which college makes the most sense financially for you. And in terms of like the things you're looking for, whether it's in a city or it's a small school or it has certain extracurriculars, those types of things, we have a college match tool for that. But we also help with the actual paying for college part. So we have a scholarship platform that vets scholarships and then presents those matched to your student. We also do FAFSA support. So if you have questions about the FAFSA, we will answer those questions for free for you. And we have our financial aid appeal letter generator and a whole bunch of other good stuff that we'll talk a little bit more about later. But for the most part in this presentation, I'm going to take off my Going Mary hat. There's going to be these moments where I pause and I talk about something specifically that we do or demonstrate it through our platform because it's easier if you can actually see it. But for the most part, we're just going to talk about financial aid in general. And we have some people still rolling in. So as I pause to let them in, bear with me there too. But let's dive right in. What is financial aid? I always like to start here because it's a very, very broad term, financial aid, but most people only think of it in a very narrow sense. So they typically think of the federal Pell Grant when they think about financial aid. But the reality is that that term is very, very broad. It is one that, according to the federal government and colleges and universities, includes grants, scholarships, work study, military benefits that you might receive, federal student loans, and private student loans as well. It's basically any money that helps you pay for college. And even the money that you get help with, maybe from your family, if maybe an aunt or uncle gives you a check for college, that's called self-help aid. So there's a really big blanket term of financial aid. And then we have little kind of smaller chunks like scholarships and work study, student loans, those types of things. Now, I like to break it down into two different categories. Financial aid, you don't have to repay those grants, work study programs, scholarships. And then financial aid, you will have to repay student loans. Now, as we're going throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about where all this aid comes from because it can come from a lot of places. The government, both state and federal, nonprofits, your college, your school district, private companies in your community, lots and lots of different places. We're also going to talk about how you can make sure you access as much of it as possible and that you're leaving as many opportunities available to you as possible. Additionally, while we're going through this, I do want to just say there's no shame in needing student loans. So if your student requires them to go to college, I really like to stress that. Obviously, we want to minimize the reliance on them and we want to make sure we're not taking out them if we can avoid it. But also there's no shame in it. College is really expensive. And so we just want to make sure we're taking the steps we can to minimize them. And then if we do have to take out a student loan, we maximize those federal student loans first before we look at those private student loans. The next thing I talk about is application timeline. And I did see a lot of parents registering that weren't parents of seniors. So I do want to spend some time about what we can do before senior year. As a freshman, sophomore, or junior, I really want you to go ahead and be applying for scholarships. My tip for freshmen and sophomores is start looking for scholarships. Typically, maybe about once a quarter, apply to one scholarship. There's not going to be as many opportunities out there for you, but they're also a lot less competitive because kids aren't looking just yet. For you juniors, I would recommend that you're applying to at least one scholarship once a month, and then for seniors, once a week. And I know that sounds like a lot, but the reality is that if you're not doing that, you're probably missing out on scholarship opportunities that you qualify for. I also want students to explore all of their post-secondary options. Look at your career goals, determine what makes the most sense for you, and determine if you need to go get a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, or if a trade program or apprenticeship might be more appropriate for whatever you're going for. And also, before you go into a career path, not knowing that you need a master's degree or a PhD, be aware of that, and also map out what those costs might be whenever you're deciding where you're going to go and how you're going to pursue those career paths. I also recommend that parents and students have a really open dialogue around any savings or funding that they're going to be able to provide for a student's college career. These conversations oftentimes happen way too late in the process, typically late in senior year for most families, where the student doesn't really understand, yes, we have a 529 plan for you, but what is the amount in that 529 plan? What can we contribute annually to your college education using that 529 plan? Those concepts are things that you really need to drill down into before your student even starts applying to colleges. I also really recommend that you start framing college as an investment and thinking about how you get the best return on your investment for your education. So it's an investment of time, of course, but especially if you're taking out student loans, it's going to be an investment of your money as well. And I also recommend that every student make a cost-conscious college list. And what I mean by that is to have a lot of diversity in that student list, or that college list rather. And for seniors, you can go ahead and do this if you realize like maybe you don't have a cost conscious list, you haven't done this analysis just yet, you feel free to still do this. But mainly for you juniors that are starting to think about where you're going to go in college tours, where you want to start applying to, I really encourage you to take a step back and evaluate it very objectively from the financial standpoint, and then look at the other things that are like where you want to go, what kind of campus makeup do you want to be on, a city campus or a rural campus? Do you want to be on a large campus or a small campus? Those types of things. But I would first look at actually the finances. And so what I recommend for making a cost-conscious college list is to have at least one private and one public university on every student's list, as well as at least one community college on every student's list, or community local college that's really inexpensive. A lot of those oftentimes are also covered by things like dual enrollment and stuff like that. So you can get some pretty good options for yourself. I also recommend that even if a student wants to go out of state and they're adamant that they're going to go out of state, still apply to at least one in-state university, because you really just want to have options in your back pocket. Now, the reason why we look for this diversity in your college list is actually just because we want to make sure you get diverse financial aid offers at the end of the day. Typically, students are applying to the same type of college, so they're only applying to really elite four-year universities that are private colleges, and they're looking at something that's very specific for them, which is great. They should know what kind of school they want to attend. But because they're applying to one specific type of college, a lot of times their offer packages all look the same, and it can limit their options when it comes down to choosing where they want to go. And for some students, it can actually derail their college education because they can't make the finances work and they don't have much leverage in terms of looking at other colleges that they've been accepted to. I also recommend when you're making this list to look into what we call meets needs universities. And this means that the college promises to cover 100% of a student's demonstrated financial need. Now, financial need is going to be cost of attendance minus your student aid index. So you need to file your FAFSA to get that. But when those colleges promise that, essentially, if you have a cost of attendance of $100,000 a year, but your student aid index is 5,000, that college is promising to cover $95,000 with financial aid opportunities. There is a catch though. Some colleges are meets needs without loans, and some are meets needs with loans, and some are meets needs for some, meaning that they might have like an income cap where they'll cover 100% of financial need for a student that has a family with an income of under $100,000 or something like that. So be careful, make sure you're looking at that, but there are compiled lists out there for you to take a look at. So make sure at least one of those is on your college list. I also, again, recommend that families are having a conversation about budget. This is especially important when you're trying to figure out where a student wants to apply. You need to understand your budget as a student before you ever get an acceptance letter, because once that acceptance letter comes in, it gets really, really hard if that student's first choice school came in as you're accepted, congratulations, you can attend, to kind of walk it back and take back that objective mindset of how does this financially work for us? I also recommend looking at net price calculators. They're going to be located on every college's website, as well as using the federal student aid estimator to get an estimated student aid index for your student. It's going to give you an idea of what your out-of-pocket cost might be. It's not going to be exact. It's not a perfect system, but it'll give you an idea. And just for everyone who's just joined, yes, this is being recorded. It is also going to be distributed to you, so you're going to be able to get the slides afterwards. Also share it with your counselor. So yes, that will be sent out for you. Once we get into senior year, our focus kind of shifts a little. I'm going to get on my soapbox in a minute about the FAFSA, but before I do, I really want to stress every single student who is graduating from high school should file the FAFSA. And every student that continues on to college, whether that's trade school, community college, they're going to their sophomore year of college, whatever it is, they should all file the FAFSA every year they continue on with their education. I'll get on my soapbox in a minute about that later, but please understand that if you walk away from this and you don't think you need to file the FAFSA, you've not walked away with the right impression, because the FAFSA is so very important in this conversation. Additionally, you might need to file a CSS profile. And I know some of you had questions about the CSS profile, so I'll kind of talk about this here really quickly. But for some colleges, they use a CSS profile to decide how much financial aid you'll receive from their college specifically. So from their endowment funds. So they might have grants or scholarships from their alumni, and they might use that as a way of determining your financial status and your financial need for their university for disbursement of their institutional aid. It does not allow you access to private financial aid opportunities. It does not allow you access to federal or state financial aid opportunities. It is just that institutional aid. So some colleges use it because they can customize it a little bit and get a little bit more tailored with what they're looking at in terms of your assets and income as a family. And they'll use that for understanding your financial need. Some people prefer it. Some people don't prefer it over the FAFSA, but they're just really objective ways of looking at finances of all of your students and making sure that you're identifying those kids that need that extra financial help. When it comes to everything outside of that, we also want to make sure we're applying to those scholarships regularly. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, but at least one scholarship once a week should be your goal as a student. I always set aside 1 hour on a Saturday and submit it an application. I also recommend students start talking with their top choice schools, connect with the financial aid office and the admissions office, talk to them about their deadlines, how they do their scholarship applications, understanding if you're going to need to do an appeal, connecting with who that might need to go through, those types of things, getting those conversations in. Building that relationship can be really beneficial to you. And transparently, we've done a lot of research here, and we've determined that the students that the college is more aware of in terms of financial neediness, so the students that have connected with their financial aid office, are more likely, significantly more likely to receive financial aid. And it really just comes down to if the school is aware of you and they have more aid come back, maybe a student decides to leave the school for some reason or not attend, they have more funding come in, they can disperse it to students, and they're going to disperse it to the students that they are aware of first. I also really recommend you start having a transparent conversation if you're a parent right now about student loans. Are you willing to co-sign? Are you willing to do a Parent Plus loan? Are you willing to do a private student loan? What is the amount that you're willing to do in a student loan annually? Those types of conversations, you need to start having them now and really go down the line of how long will this take us to repay? How much interest will this accumulate? What is what I'm comfortable with? And making sure your students on the same page with you there, because a lot of times students aren't, and that can be a little bit difficult. Now, everything I just talked about in terms of what to do when, this is kind of a reformatting of that, but these are the 6 steps to maximize your financial aid. There is truly an order of operations here. So we always need to file the FAFSA and state aid applications first. In the state of Maryland, by filing the FAFSA, you have also applied for your state aid opportunities too, so you don't have to worry about that separate application. But if you're a student that you don't qualify to file the FAFSA for some reason, if you don't have a social security number, for instance, you can file that alternative application instead. So talk to your counselor, because there is an application you can do instead of the FAFSA for state aid opportunities. But obviously you only qualify for those if you stay in the state of Maryland to go to college. Step number 3 is those scholarships. Again, we're going to be doing those all throughout the school year. And step number 4 is deciding where you want to go. Now, most students start with step number 4, and that's just because when we're talking to students and we're researching what colleges to attend, we're going on those college tours, students get really attached to one specific school. They have their top choice school and they want to go there. And so they're oftentimes figuring out the finances after this, they decide where they want to go. And we always encourage students to take a step back and to not commit in your heart about where you're going to attend until you get your financial aid offer letters from those schools. And those aren't going to come in until spring semester of senior year. So we're looking at February through March of senior year when you're deciding where you're going to go. And then if you need to file a financial aid appeal, maybe your finances have changed. Maybe you have a situation where the FAFSA doesn't capture it. Maybe you're taking care of a loved one and they've become independent for you. Whatever those circumstances might be, if you need to file an appeal, you're going to need to do that before May 1st of your senior year and then wait on that response from the college. And so we want to make sure we're waiting on all of that before we even decide where we're going to attend. And then with step number 6, that's going to be student loans. Oftentimes this is where parents get more involved, and this is where their misstep kind of happens, because maybe their student didn't file the FAFSA ahead of the priority deadlines for their school. Maybe their student wasn't proactively applying for those scholarships. Maybe their student decided where they were going to attend before they figured out the money. Whatever the circumstances are, you should never be looking at student loans if you skipped any of these steps. You should always apply for the FAFSA, look at scholarships, compare those offers, and file a financial aid appeal before you start looking at student loans if that financial aid appeal makes sense for you. So make sure you're following these steps and you'll kind of stay on track with making sure you maximize the opportunities that your student is eligible for. The next thing I'm going to dive into is the FAFSA, and this is where I'll get on my soapbox about the FAFSA. If you are a parent of a high school senior, you should be filing the FAFSA, hopefully opening on December 1st and without any hiccups, before January 1st of 2025. That should be the goal that you set in mind about filing the FAFSA. Now, what's happening with the FAFSA right now? If you heard about last year, there were some hiccups. Things did not go well whenever they revamped the FAFSA. And so they are doing beta testing right now on the FAFSA for this year. And transparently, it's actually gone pretty well. We've seen a lot of positive results from that. But they have committed to making the FAFSA open on or before December 1st, 2024, and to also make the data available to all institutions on or before December 1st, 2024. This is really, really positive. Last year, it didn't even open until January, and that data didn't get to colleges until May. So that's a really positive improvement this year. Students will also be able to correct their FAFSA on or before December 1st as well. And I'm saying on or before December 1st because that's the language the Federal Student Aid Administration is using, but I would just bank on December 1st for when it opens up. Now, in those beta tests, we have seen a lot of really positive results. So far, thousands of students have submitted the FAFSA. The most common issue is actually the signatures falling off, which was an issue we saw last year. So I'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about some tips for filing the FAFSA. But know that generally this year so far has gone smoother than last year, which is what we want to see. Now, why is that FAFSA so very important to file? The reality is that it opens the door to the vast majority of financial aid opportunities that are out there. And that is in the form of federal financial aid, state financial aid, institutional financial aid, and private financial aid. And that can come in the form of grants or scholarships, work-study programs, all kinds of good stuff, and those federal student loans, which if you're going to have to take out a student loan, that should be what you try and take out first in terms of those subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Additionally, when it comes to the FAFSA, most colleges are saying we're requiring you to file the FAFSA to be considered for our merit scholarship opportunities. And you might be going, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's a merit scholarship, not a financial needs scholarship. Why would they be making me do that? And simply it's just because they're realizing more and more families are opting out of the FAFSA and they're not filing it, and then they're missing out on financial aid opportunities and then taking out student loans, which then makes the value of the college look bad. It makes their graduates poor performers out in the market, and they don't want to see that happening. So we're seeing colleges come back around and say, yeah, we won't consider you for our merit-based scholarships if you don't file the FAFSA, even though we're not even looking at that data. We just want to see the check mark. You did it. That's all. Same thing with CSS profile schools. So if you do have a school that requires it, those schools are oftentimes doing that now as well. Now, I also want to stress in this because most people think federal student aid, FAFSA equals Pell Grant. That's not what the FAFSA is. It does make you eligible for the Pell Grant, but not all need-based aid is income restricted like the federal Pell Grant is. Most of it is actually based off of a financial need calculation, which is based on each individual school's determination. And so they're going to take the they're going to calculate financial need to equal the cost of attendance minus your student aid index. If you don't have a student aid index, they can't do that calculation, or they're just going to use a big fat zero. So if it's $100,000 minus zero, that's not ideal. Or $100,000 minus 100,000 of a student aid index, it's not ideal. So we want to make sure every college is able to calculate your financial need, because if it's an expensive college, you're ultimately probably going to demonstrate financial need, even if you think you have a really high income and assets. Additionally, when it comes to the FAFSA, every college is going to have their own process for determining your neediness at their school. Some of them will be first come, first serve. Typically, you're going to see that in schools where they have financial aid that runs out every year. Private colleges typically have larger endowment funds, which is also why the cost-conscious college list tip is to make sure you include a private college on there. But you want to make sure that you're filing those FAFSAs as early as possible, just so that you don't miss out on any priority deadlines, you don't miss out on financial aid opportunities, just because that college ran out of aid. So we want to make sure we're filing that. I also want to stress, especially because I talked about meets needs universities earlier, most colleges are not meets needs. They do not promise to cover 100% of your financial neediness. Most colleges are going to instead offer you what they can offer you, and it might be a combination of merit aid and financial need-based financial aid. So you're just going to have to prepare yourself for that and be aware that whatever the FAFSA says your student aid index is not an out-of-pocket estimate, because that can be a little scary for some families when they see that too. So what is this student aid index? Because I keep saying it. It replaced the EFC last year, and it's basically a formula that the FAFSA uses for objectively evaluating everyone's finances. So your family's income and assets, and calculating I don't want to say what you're able to afford for college, because that's not really what it is, but it's a really common misunderstanding that that's what it does. It's just a really objective evaluation of your family's finances. It's then going to be given to the college. And the college is going to use that to calculate this financial neediness of their school. And then from there, they're going to determine how much aid you will receive as a student. So it's step 1 is file the FAFSA. Step 2 is you get your student aid index. Step 3 is the college calculates your financial need. And step 4 is getting a financial aid offer. So it's not as simple as you file the FAFSA, that's how much money you're going to get. The FAFSA doesn't really make you eligible for anything. It does, but it doesn't. It's really hard to explain. But the FAFSA is not going to give you money. It's going to be the college that's giving you money. There are things like the Pell Grant that they're entitlements, so you're going to get them if you qualify for them by filing the FAFSA, but it's not as simple as you filed the FAFSA is going to issue you a check. The Department of Education is going to issue a check. That's just not how it works. It actually goes to the college, and they're going to use that to pay down your bill. In terms of institutional aid or private scholarships or anything like that, maybe state aid programs that you might receive, those are, again, not going to be paid to you directly, and it's not going to be an out-of-pocket estimate of what you have to pay in terms of after you receive all of your financial aid, what your out-of-pocket cost would be. The student aid index is just a number, an eligibility index that college is using to calculate financial need. And then from there, they're going to offer you financial aid. I know that's a lot of information, so bear with me. From here, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I know there are questions rolling in, but I'm going to shift gears and I want to talk about FAFSA contributors. Basically, a FAFSA contributor is anyone who puts information on a student's FAFSA application. So that's always going to include the student, but sometimes that will also include one or both parents and or a step parent. For some students, that can include a spouse. If they're a student that is married, that's probably not going to apply here since your students are in high school. But if a student was married, then they would include their spouse and not their parents instead. FAFSA is not going to have a parent contributor who is a non-adoptive grandparent. The foster parents are not going to be contributors, aunts or uncles, legal guardian siblings. They are not FAFSA contributors. So if you're a student and you're in a situation where your non-adoptive grandparents are your legal guardians, or you have foster parents currently, you're actually going to be considered an independent student, and you will be the only FAFSA contributor for yourself. Every other student is going to be deemed dependent. I really want to stress this because it can be a little bit frustrating, but how you file your taxes does not matter when it comes to FAFSA dependency. It's a different determination. It's not the same as how we do taxes. So if you are a parent and you have your child living at home with you right now, generally, you're going to have to assume that you're going to have to put your information on the FAFSA form. Additionally, there are going to be situations where a step parent might need to be a FAFSA contributor, and we're going to talk about that next. But generally, most students are going to be deemed dependent for the purposes of the FAFSA, and as a parent, you will have to put your information onto that student's FAFSA application. So who is a student's FAFSA contributor, and how do you figure this out? Step 1 is determining if a student is independent or dependent. I've linked out to it here, so when you get the slides later, you'll be able to reference this. But generally, unless a student's 24, they're working on a master's degree, they're in foster care or were after the age of 13, they're a ward of the state, they're in illegal guardianship, they're homeless, they're emancipated, the student is a military veteran, they're active duty, those circumstances aren't going to apply for most students. And so for most of your students, they're going to be a dependent student. And in that case, we're going to have to add your information, your signature as a parent, and your consent to pull their information from the federal tax your federal tax information from the IRS. My goodness, I'm getting tongue-tied here. But if you're an independent student, you're your only FAFSA contributor. So after we determine that your student is dependent, that's what we're going to assume here. The next step is actually determining your family structure. And that's going to be the first question we're going to ask is, do the biological or adoptive parents, are they married? And how do they file their taxes? So if the biological or adoptive parents are married to each other and filing their taxes jointly, only one of you is going to be required to have an FSA ID and be a FAFSA contributor for that student. What will happen is that one parent will make an FSA ID, they will log in, they will put the information on the FAFSA. The federal tax information transfer that you're consenting to will pull in the information from that other parent, and they'll just sign in. They'll sign the application, and then they'll be good to go. On the flip side, if you are biological or adoptive parents and you are married but filing your taxes separately, you both need to go ahead and make that FSA ID, and you will both be FAFSA contributors. You'll both have to log in and put that information on the FAFSA, again, because it's porting information in from the federal IRS via the federal tax information transfer. Now, if we are parents and you live together, but you're not married, you're separated, maybe you're divorced, never married, whatever the circumstances are, if you are both parents living together, you will both file as a student's FAFSA contributor. So you'll both need that FSA ID, you'll both log in, you'll put your information on there. On the flip side, if you are parents and you do not live together, so maybe you're divorced or separated, your parents aren't living together, whatever their circumstances are, then the next question is, which parent provided the greater financial support to the student in the past 12 months? If we can give a definitive answer that it is parent A or parent B, that parent will be the FAFSA contributor for that student. And then if that parent is remarried, and they file their taxes separately from their now spouse, so that student step parent, then they will also be a FAFSA contributor. That step parent will be required to have an FSA ID login and put their information on the FAFSA. If the parents are, the parent and step parent are married filing their taxes jointly, then the step parent doesn't need to have that FSA ID. If the parents ask this question and they determine that they both provide exactly equal financial support to the student in the last 12 months, then the question is going to be who has the greater income and assets. That parent will be the FAFSA contributor, and then the same logic, if they are remarried and filing their taxes separately from the step parent, then that step parent will also need an FSA ID, and they will be a FAFSA contributor. I know that's a lot of information, and it is exactly this order that you have to do these steps. I've linked in these slides here for you to reference later. There's an infographic that I think is really helpful. It's a flow chart that is also helpful to reference back to. So if you are still not sure, I will keep answering questions if you want me to at the end, but just know I am sending you this reference for you to go back to later. Now, we do see some issues when it comes to determining FAFSA contributors. Last year, we saw a lot of parents filing the FAFSA for their student. Do not do this. This is your student's application. This is your student's FAFSA. They need to have their own FSA ID. They have to be able to log in. And we always recommend that they start the FAFSA. We saw less issues when the student started the FAFSA last year. So always have the student start the FAFSA, and they will invite you as a parent contributor over to their FAFSA. Don't do it the other way around. Additionally, we did see some issues where parents just weren't aware that the rules changed, and they weren't aware that there are rules when it comes to determining the FAFSA contributor, especially in the case of divorced, separated, or never married parents. So things that we saw were assuming that it's the custodial parent who's the FAFSA contributor, or just assuming that it's the parent who files the student as a dependent on taxes. That doesn't matter in this case at all. We also saw situations where parents believed that either parent could be a contributor and they just got to pick which one they wanted. Not the case. If you do that, you're going to probably have a verification and have to correct your FAFSA for your student. And then the other thing that we saw, and if you know this is the circumstance for your family, tense family dynamics sometimes play a role here, where the wrong parent would intentionally file the FAFSA for the student and kind of hijack the situation. So we always want the student to have their FSA ID in advance, because then they're able to protect their FAFSA, because if they have it, then the other parent can't log in and take over. But make sure that you know who the FAFSA contributor is early, especially before you have access to it. Right now would be a great time to make those FSA IDs. And then make sure you know who those parent contributors are and have that determined so that you don't run into an issue there. And again, with the student leaving the process, you're going to run into that less. We also saw issues where independent students didn't understand that they did not need a parent or their legal guardians or their non-adoptive parents, their foster parents on the FAFSA. They are their sole contributor. So if that applies to you as a student, you will be the only person putting info on your FAFSA, and that is A-OK. I do see a question here that does make sense for me to answer. It's usually one that comes in. If you are a parent and you already have an FSA ID, maybe because you went to college, so you had one from then, or from helping an older child file the FAFSA maybe a year ago or two, you have your FSA ID. You don't need to make a new one. You cannot make a new one. Think of it like a social security number. You can only have one per person, but anyone who logs in to put info on that FAFSA needs their own individual FSA ID. So that might be one or both parents. It might be a parent and a step parent. It will always be the student. So you know the student needs their FSA ID. Then you've got to ask those questions about who that student's FAFSA contributors are going to be as well. The next thing I want to talk about is confusing questions and sections we saw on the FAFSA last year. First thing I talk about is this question here. This is really tricky. A lot of students read it as, are your parents Are your parents willing to put information on the FAFSA is how they read it. This is actually asking, are your parents refusing to put information on the FAFSA? So are your parents not willing to help with this FAFSA application? If a student answers yes here, they are not going to be able to proceed. They're going to be in a situation where they are only eligible for student loans. You don't want that option for your student. I hope not. So make sure we answer no here. It does, I think, this year default to no. I've done the prototype a couple times and it auto defaulted there. But just make sure you slow down and answer this question as no, my parents are not refusing to put their information on the FAFSA form. This next one is going to be in the parent section of the form. So that first one was on the student section. This one is in the parent section of the form. There's a question about federal benefits. So if you are a family that receives free or reduced lunch at school, but you would not qualify for that benefit based on your individual family's income, you cannot check the box here that you receive free or reduced lunch. So some school districts give all of their students free or reduced lunch. And so we saw last year a lot of families automatically clicking that, and you cannot do that. So if you are in the case where you receive free or reduced lunch, you have to apply for it. It's not something that everyone in the school receives, then you can go ahead and check it. But if your school district does give everyone free or reduced lunch, you're going to have to go through the Department of Agriculture's eligibility requirements and double check, because if you check this box here, it's actually not going to ask you some questions about your assets that you need to answer. So making that mistake means you're going to have to go through and make a correction on the FAFSA, which delays financial aid offers, which delays you understanding your financial aid options in terms of colleges too. So make sure you slow down. Don't make a mistake on those two questions. Some other things that we saw last year, just general best practices, are the student should always start the FAFSA. The FAFSA should also be done in one session. Really recommend that. Since we are still seeing the same issues reported with signatures falling off, we most frequently saw that when the student would kind of start and stop the FAFSA. So when they logged out and came back later, the signature would fall off, but it's not really obvious for that student that that's happened. So you want to make sure just do it all in one setting, be ready, just get it done. It doesn't take that long, usually 30 minutes to an hour for most families, even if they run into hiccups, is plenty of time to file that FAFSA for both the student and the parent, but try and do it all in one setting. It's going to make a really big difference. We also want everyone to have their FSA IDs set up in advance. So FSA IDs take about 4 days to set up. They go through a process, and I'll show you an infographic in just a second, where they actually verify it with the Social Security Administration. So if you run into an issue, it can take even longer. And what you don't want is you've started the FAFSA, then you have to stop, and 2 weeks later you log back in, and now you're able to make the progress on the FAFSA. Because again, we saw more issues when people started and stopped. Also, of course, make sure you've got the right parent contributors. Now I'm going to show this infographic here. This is what happens when you go to make an FSA ID. It is not you make your login, you're good to go. It actually goes through a verification process with the Social Security Administration. So for most people, that's going to go along this top line here. We're going to see you start, you have a Social Security number, you go and match with the Social Security Administration, you're good to go. 4 days later, you have an account, you're ready to go. What we unfortunately saw for a lot of people, though, was that they would get a mismatch with the Social Security Administration. Most commonly, it was because name changes. Maybe they have their middle initial on their Social Security card, and maybe they've removed it. There are different things like that. So make sure everything's an exact match with how it would match up with the Social Security Administration. Punctuation, capitalization, spaces matter. So be very careful, because you don't want to end up in a situation, because you'll keep trying to correct it and it doesn't necessarily give you the answer as to why. So make sure that you're very careful. You double check that you're putting things in that would match with the Social Security Administration with what you know is correct for yourself. So that's going to be the case for most students and parents when they have a Social Security number. For students without a social, you're going to go file a different form. You're not going to file the FAFSA. You're going to file the Maryland alternative application. But if you're a student with a Social Security number, but your parent does not, you can still file the FAFSA. What will happen is your parent will file for an alternative FSA ID. So they'll go through and say, no, I don't have a social. And then they'll go through knowledge-based verification, where they're confirming records that they have on your parents at the federal government. And if things match, they're going to get their FSA ID set up. If it doesn't match, they're going to go through some ID proofing. That can take a little bit longer. So you'll just go through a little bit of a longer process to get that set up. So again, why it's so important to make sure those are set up in advance. It's super important, because it takes some time, unfortunately. Now I'm going to kind of gloss over this here, but I do want to highlight one thing. Right here, I have the student aid index estimator. So if you want to use that later, it's right there for you. But also here's the prototype for the FAFSA. So if you're curious what it looks like and you want to get a little bit more familiar with the form, the questions, the flow, you can click on this link and it'll take you over to the prototype so you can get a little bit more familiar with it. There's also a lot of videos from FSA that they recorded last year and they're available on YouTube that also shows what this looks like too. The big thing here though, make your FSA IDs, figure out who your FAFSA parent contributors are going to be, and listen to your counselors, be aware of what's going on with the FAFSA, and try and file the FAFSA by the end of the year of this 2024 year, not academic school year. The next thing I want to talk about here, shifting gears a bit, is scholarship strategies. The real thing here is that there are best practices with scholarships. We always want to make sure we're focusing our energy in the right places. And I like to be really frank, and so I'm going to tell you the truth. The application process for scholarships is really frustrating. Students get ghosted. They don't hear things back for 4 or 5 months because most scholarship providers don't select a winner for 4 to 6 months. Additionally, they're time consuming. They're oftentimes very time consuming, especially if you're looking at essay scholarships. And they're also oftentimes misunderstood to be a bigger role than what they are. So when you hear from a student that says, I got a full ride scholarship, I don't have to pay anything to go to school, they're not always full ride scholarships. And I don't mean that student's lying, because they're not trying to in most cases, but they've received probably a financial aid offer that is more diverse than just a singular scholarship. Singular individual full ride scholarships make up less than 0.2% of all scholarships out there. Same thing with $20,000 scholarships or more. They're very, very, very rare comparative to the $1,000, the $500 scholarships that are out there. So most students who are getting a full ride are getting a couple of different scholarships, or they're getting a couple of scholarships and a Pell Grant, and they're getting a work study. They're getting a combination of financial aid opportunities offered to them. So understanding that scholarships are one piece of this puzzle is really, really important. And it also stresses back to the reason why we need to file that FAFSA and or CSS profile, and CSS profile, not or, because you need to file the FAFSA even if you are filing that CSS profile. We also want to make sure we're choosing an affordable college, because it's a lot easier to cover a gap of $5,000 with a private scholarship than it is to cover a gap of $50,000. So being mindful of where you choose to go to school, making sure it's an affordable school for yourself. We also want to make sure we're always choosing better odds. What I mean by that is choosing the scholarships that fewer students apply for or that they qualify for. I'm not saying don't apply to the big name scholarships, because you should, but the reality is that they're probably receiving 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 applicants versus your local scholarship from the Rotary Club, which might receive 1 or 2. So we want to apply for that Rotary scholarship and focus on those opportunities, because that's actually a better use of our time, because we have such a better chance of winning it. Additionally, the more the merrier, apply to scholarships, as many as you possibly can. A lot of times students will sit down and they'll do 5 or 10 scholarships and they'll stop. Again, the scholarship process is not super fun for a lot of students. It's really frustrating for them. But if we can encourage them to apply to more and more scholarships, that's going to be better. I always treat it like a job application. If you're looking for a job, you wouldn't stop after 5 or 10 resumes that you submit. You would keep on going until you got your yes. It's kind of the same logic we want to take with scholarships too. And how we apply those strategies are first and foremost local scholarships. These are the opportunities students have the best chance of winning. And bear with me, I've got a little bit of a scratchy throat coming on. But these local scholarships are going to be offered to students only in your high school, only in your community, only in your school district. And they are the most overlooked opportunities that are out there. I'll talk about this more in a minute. I'll link to the slide, link a slide with all of the resources there, but you have a lot of opportunities for Montgomery County. So make sure you're looking at those opportunities. Institutional scholarships are going to be opportunities, again, offered only to the students that attend that college. My tip here is to not just look up the school and scholarships, like University of Alabama scholarships. Don't do that. Instead, look up the departmental page for the school. So if I wanted to be a marketing major at the University of Alabama, I would be part of Culverhouse School of Business. So what I would do is look up Culverhouse School of Business scholarships for freshmen. That's also where you find upperclassmen scholarships, by the way, and master's programs, PhD program scholarships too. And I would also give you the tip, again, reach out to those financial aid offices, because every school's scholarship process is different. Some will have like a common app where you apply to one application, it submits to all of their scholarships. Others will kind of have it parsed around. Some will have it where if you apply and you're admitted, you're automatically considered for some or all of their scholarships. So knowing that in advance is really helpful. So connecting with those financial aid offices is a good idea. Also, small awards and essay scholarships. These are just scholarships students don't want to look at. Those $1,000 scholarships that are for 1 year receive far fewer applicants than the ones that are for $20,000 for 4 years. And obviously, it's a lot more money, but again, we're receiving so fewer applications that you have a better chance of winning that scholarship, and it's so much so that you should pay attention to those more. Essay scholarships, typically what I see is students try to write an essay for every single scholarship, which is a mistake. I would instead look up the most common essay prompts for scholarships each year. They're usually pretty consistent, and write 2 or 3 solid essays that they feel really good about and reuse them. You don't have to write a new essay for every single scholarship that's out there. You'll have a one-off about zombies that you need to write, but for the most part, you're going to find that these essay prompts are a little bit generic, and they're quite common, and you can write 2 or 3 essays and reuse them, tweaking them here and there. And lastly, start early, keep going. I've talked about this in terms of applying in freshman, sophomore, and junior year of high school, but also keep on applying to scholarships once you get to college, because there's additional opportunities that are out there, but they're overlooked by most students. Now, on Going Merry, we do something a little bit different with our scholarships. We match scholarships to students, so you don't have to figure out what you qualify for and what you don't. We also vet every scholarship, so there's no scams, no data mining, none of that kind of stuff on our platform, and we bundle scholarships to make it a little bit more time efficient. And we also feature local scholarships and national scholarships on our platform. So again, trying to put it all in one place to make it easier for you to find those opportunities. That said, we are not the only scholarship site out there, far from it. I think we do it a little bit better, but there are some more here listed. Some other ones I don't have listed are Scholarships 360, Scholly, oh goodness, Niche is another one, but there's lots of different places to look. So make sure you do look. Double check to make sure that these sites do vet their scholarships. Not all of them do. And so if they don't, you're going to have to take a little bit of extra time and vet them yourself. Be mindful of any kind of data mining scams. And also, if you ever feel uncomfortable with the information being asked of you, don't give it. And also never pay for a scholarship. If it's asking you to pay a fee to apply, it's a scam. Don't do that. But know that sometimes a scholarship provider will only put a scholarship on one site. It is not necessarily a sign of a scam, but it is something you should look into a little bit more deeply and just confirm that it's a legitimate opportunity. And I mentioned earlier, here's a link to your local scholarships. I grabbed a screenshot so you can see they've got some 9th through 12th grade scholarships offered here for your community. So you should be making sure you check those out too later. And I've embedded the link there. Next thing I want to talk about, and it's going to give me a minute to drink some more water, hopefully relieve my throat. What should we do when we get those financial aid offers coming in? What do we need to consider? What do we do with financial aid appeals? And what do we do if we have a financial gap? So what I'm going to do is actually play a video of our site. We have this tool called College Cost Insights that walks you through how to analyze these financial aid offer letters, what the different components are, and what you need to consider. And then after that, I'll also talk a little bit more about how you can do this on pen and paper if that's something you'd like to do as well. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. I'm a little bit nervous. So I'm going to play this video. If you can't hear it, drop it in the chat.
What we're going to focus on is how they make sure that they choose the right college too by comparing the different financial aid offers they get. So I'm going to click onto this to show you how that works. Now, look, the first thing, as I said, is that it's really complicated for students to understand all of the different terms used in financial aid award letters. And sometimes it feels a little bit like the colleges do that on purpose. You'll see on this first page of our tool is we sympathize with students. We acknowledge that it's difficult for them to understand it. And reference this kind of incredible study that was done 4 years ago that found that there were 136 different terms used to describe the same type of federal loan. It becomes impossible for students to truly understand it. So we give them that bit of context to help get them started, make sure they feel heard and supported. And then what we do is ask them to fill out the information from their award letters. We've used these two universities. We have no links or anything to the universities, but I want to show you a live example. So what the student will do with their first college is input all of the costs that they have in the award letter, the grants and scholarships that they've been awarded in it. They'll input to their work study. And then finally, of course, the different loans that they've been offered to. Once they've done that for each of the colleges they're considering, we'll come through and actually ask them what their family contribution is going to be. And in particular, what the real family contribution, there's always a lot of frustration about the expected family contribution being way off. So we just ask, what can your family afford to contribute? And based on that, we'll crunch the numbers and come up with 3 recommendations for your students. The first is about how they maximize their long-term wealth. You can see it up at the top here. The second is then about how they minimize their student loan debt. And the third is about how they minimize their costs. Now, we recommend this top one, but we know other families have different priorities, so we want to give students these 3 different recommendations. Scrolling down, we make it really easy to understand how they're different and help families choose which one is most relevant to them. There's a quick, easy 2-minute video that is perfect for the attention span of your students to explain how everything works. But most importantly, if you keep scrolling, is this standardized financial aid award letter for each college. So it takes all these complicated terms and just spits out really standard, clear answers for students, like showing them their net cost and how that differs between each college, and then also the financial gap that they have for each college. And so suddenly, from all these complicated different letters, you have a really clear idea of exactly what each college is going to mean in terms of your costs. Scrolling down, we also want to give students a sense of what their future looks like. If they decide to go to that college, what will that mean for them in terms of their future salary, for example? And so again, for each college, we show them their expected future salary and their expected future loan payments. And a really important thing here is we show them what percentage of their future salary is likely to be spent on loans. What you can see is that Bowdoin, despite the fact we saw earlier that it was this higher financial gap and higher net cost, because it has that higher monthly salary, ends up being a lower percentage of future salary that's getting spent on loans. You can also see that by looking at the student's long-term future. So we show over time, and again, this is using data that comes from the US Department of Education. We show them what their total earnings will be over the next 20 years after their graduation, as well as how much will be spent on loans and interest, and give them a really clear way of understanding which will help them maximize their total earnings after loans. Again, we talk about other concepts for them, like acceptable levels of student debt. But like with everything we do on Going Merry, we really make it really clear and easy for the student to understand so that they make the right decision when it comes to paying for college. I'll wrap up there. Thanks so much for watching, and we're looking forward to helping your students maximize their financial aid and then make the right decision when it comes to which college to. Thanks.
So I hope that makes a lot of sense. The big thing here is just making sure you're looking at those future outcomes for the schools your student is interested in, as well as if they're going to be borrowing, what the full amount of that student loan will be. So you'll take each of the 4 years that it will take. So if it's $5,000 the first year, you'll make it $20,000, and then look at the amount of interest that will accumulate on that loan. There's some calculators out there that you can use as well. But really you just want to think about the net cost of that loan when determining the outcomes. And you'll want to look at the debt to income ratio when you graduate. Is that going to be something that is manageable for the student? You don't want a debt to income ratio with a student loan that's over 10%. And you also want to be mindful of those interest rates and stuff like that. The big thing is, though, just making sure your student is taking a step back and looking at this information really objectively, which can be really, really tough. So making sure that they're thinking about the finances with colleges, making sure that they're looking at all of the different costs that might be associated with it, and they're factoring all those things in. Obviously, a college where they're going to be staying local and they don't need room and board, going to be a little bit of a different scenario than a college where they're going to need to travel across the country. They're going to need to have room and board. They might need roommates, those types of things. So circumstances, they're going to have to think about those finances as well. The next thing I want to talk about is a financial aid appeal. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but it's essentially where you ask a college to give you more money. If you said the financial aid offer was disappointing, then we want to ask that college to give us additional financial aid. Now, the big caveat here is for most colleges, it's going to be a non-starter if you didn't file the FAFSA and or the CSS profile, depending on that college, if they require that. They do this because they want to, again, make sure they're looking at your finances objectively, which is really hard to do when you don't give them any information. So they're going to say, hey, you're not eligible for an appeal unless you've done the FAFSA. My big thing here is that if your finances change for some reason in the middle of the year, I just had a family I was talking to the other day where the father, who was the breadwinner, had passed away. That students in the middle of their freshman year of college, mom now can't afford the expenses associated with college. she's filing an appeal. That way she can get more aid from the college because their financial circumstances have changed pretty drastically. You cannot do that if you haven't filed the FAFSA. So we always want to have that in our back pocket as well. Now, some reasons we might file a financial aid appeal with the college is if we just didn't get enough money, we got a better offer from another school. If the FAFSA doesn't reflect some nuanced situation, maybe you have extra expenses like medical expenses that the FAFSA didn't capture, that you can file it based on that. You can also file an appeal if your financial circumstances have changed. So if you had greater income in 2023 than you did in 2024, because the FAFSA is going to be based on prior tax years. So if you're a senior, it's going to be looking at your 2023 taxes for parents for the 2025-2026 FAFSA. Then you can actually file an appeal on those grounds and they can consider that and they can make what's called a professional judgment to give you additional aid. Now, some best practices here with a financial aid appeal is don't lie, be prepared to give documentation, keep it really brief and succinct, stick to the facts. You also want to make sure that you're telling the college that they are your top choice school and to be legitimately transparent with them. So you don't want to write an appeal to 8 different colleges. You only really want to appeal to your top 1 or 2 choices. It can be bad form because they're going to call and confirm information a lot of times and it can look bad. Also be really careful of deadlines and processes. Every college is a little bit different. So I always recommend calling them and just asking, when's your deadline? What do I need to do? How does this work for me? I'm going to play this video because, again, I just think it's easier to see it in real time. We have a tool called the Financial Aid Appeal Letter Generator. It'll help you write a financial aid appeal letter. So you can always use that. There's also templates all over the place that you can get help with writing a financial aid appeal, but I just want you to see what the different components are going to look like, especially for you senior parents, because if this is something you're going to need to do, it's something you want to go ahead and start thinking about, especially if you know your financial circumstances have changed. I also recommend an appeal if you are in a situation where you've got multiple children in college at the same time. You can write an appeal on the basis that you save for college on the EFC formula instead of the student aid index formula. But I'm again play this video really quickly. I'm trying to answer questions as I'm going as well.
Hello and welcome. This is a quick video guide to the Financial Aid Appeal Generator and how it can help you write an appeal in 4 steps. To get started, you'll want to go to goingmerry.com or download the Going Merry app. Note that this tool is only available to high school seniors and parents. From there, go to the Appeals Generator and click on Start Now. Step 1 is to enter your basic info. You'll answer a few questions about yourself and your college. If you already have a Going Merry profile, your basic info should be filled out automatically. You should see an appeal letter introduction pop up on the right-hand side. For step 2, you'll answer questions about your school and why it's your top choice. You can find some example answers here if you're not sure what to say. We recommend providing a couple specific reasons. For step 3, you'll fill out the reasons for your appeal. You can choose from 6 options. Choose option 1 if you got a better financial aid package from a similar college. If you're not sure what that means or are having trouble deciphering your aid package, you can view these resources at the top to learn more. You can add up to 3 colleges here. If you were accepted to a better ranked college, select option 2. You'll need to upload your admission letter here. If your family income this year is lower than expected, choose this option. Here, we provide a couple of common reasons you can choose from for why your family income went down this year. Or you can provide your own reason. If your family had more expenses than they reported, choose option 4. Option 5 will apply to most students who either made a mistake on their FAFSA or there was something wrong with the form. This last option is here if you don't see your reason on this list. Here you can give more information about why you are appealing. Once you have provided all your reasons, you can preview your letter and make any changes and edits. When you're happy with it, you can generate the PDF and you're done. From there, you can send the letter to each college.
So I hope that makes a little bit of sense and seeing it is helpful. I think it is, but again, there are templates that are online. I would really recommend against just kind of writing your own letter and just kind of going off script, just because there is a really strict process that a lot of these colleges have when it comes to a financial aid appeal. I always, again, recommend calling them first before you start this process. And if you know you're going to need one, go ahead and call them. Get connected, figure out who that might be with the main contact person, all that kind of good stuff. It's not too early to do that. And again, building a relationship with them is the best strategy in terms of making sure you're aware of all of your opportunities. Now, really quickly, I do want to talk about student loans just because I know they can be scary, and especially if you don't know much about them, it's a little bit overwhelming because there's actually 4 different core types of student loans. Again, I want to stress there's no shame in needing a student loan, but we really want to make sure you minimize reliance on them by maximizing your aid through scholarships, filing the FAFSA, state aid applications, financial aid appeals, and all that kind of other stuff. We want to exhaust those options first. Now, when it comes to looking at student loans, there are some best practices that you want to keep in mind. Pick an affordable college, file the FAFSA, only take out what you need. Don't borrow extra and don't use those funds for non-necessary reasons. And continuing to apply for financial aid opportunities to minimize your reliance on those student loans as much as possible. Now, I like to kind of group direct subsidized and unsubsidized together because they're very, very similar. The core difference between these two is that the direct subsidized do not accumulate interest while the student is in school, and you are only eligible for direct subsidized loans if you demonstrate financial neediness at that school. So one school might offer you them and one school might not. There are also annual caps on these loans, and they differ based on the loan that you're extended. But generally, these are going to be the best type of student loan you can get. They're only in the name of the student. They are not going to require a guarantor. They're not going to require like an application or anything. And so they're much easier to receive. They also have fixed interest rates and are structured in a way that is oftentimes easier for students to repay. And the interest rates are fixed by the federal government. So they're typically below market value that you're going to see out on the private market. You don't get to pick which ones you get. And like I said, there are annual caps and the loan amounts vary by year, and you're also not eligible for them if you don't file the FAFSA. With Parent Plus loans, these are going to be more like a traditional loan. You're going to apply for them as a parent, and you will be the only person on that application. Your student will not be on this loan in any capacity. I really like to stress that because that's something that sometimes surprises parents when they go and try and get the loan over to their student upon graduation, and you can't. It's not an option. Parent Plus loans are going to require a credit check. They're going to require an origination, and they do expect you to pay the loan back once it's dispersed. Same case with subsidized and unsubsidized, just a little bit of a different structure. You do have the ability to defer these loans as well, but we generally recommend against it. And same thing with subsidized and unsubsidized too. If you can pay back the amount while the student is in school, that's actually ideal because you'll minimize the amount of interest that accumulates, which can be quite difficult to repay if it keeps accumulating. Federal student loans are going to also be offered by federal student loan providers. So Parent Plus is also going to be offered by them, and they could typically be a little bit more flexible in terms of income-driven repayment plans over the course of 10 or 15 years and can make it a little bit easier to manage your payments. The big thing here, they're going to be interest rates based off of the private market. So for some families, they do find that they have much better interest rates going to a private student loan provider, and that's a pro and con that you need to weigh as an individual family. Additionally, like I said, these are in the name of this parent, in the name of the parent only. They cannot be transferred to your student. The only way to transfer this loan to your student is to refinance them to a private student loan provider. So you're getting rid of those federal student loan provider benefits. And that's not always the most feasible option because we're talking about a student that might have a limited income history, a limited credit history, and now they're trying to take on a loan that's $50,000, $20,000, $100,000 maybe. And so it might not be feasible for you to refinance that loan over to them. With private student loans, the big thing here is do your research. A lot of families get one quote from one rate check, and that's not ideal. You really want to do it with three to five private student loan providers. They're going to look at things like your credit history, your borrowing history, cosigner data, the amount that you want to borrow, all that kind of good stuff. You can get one from a credit union, a bank, a private company, lots of different places. But you've got to do your research because everything varies based on who you go with. I always recommend calling customer service and chatting with them. Are they friendly? Are they easy to get a hold of? Are they willing to answer your questions really transparently? If having a mobile app is really important to you, make sure they've got one. If you want the option for deferment, make sure you ask to see if they have that. Do they offer rate match? Those types of things. If it's important to you, you need to ask. Typically what we see is that this loan is going to be in the name of the student with the parent as a cosigner. Dropping off of that loan as a parent can sometimes be difficult. So be aware that you're asking questions about that before you go ahead and do it. And also think through, do you want to be a co-signer for your student? There are pros and cons to it. I'll link to it here. I'm going to actually kind of wrap this up so that we can chat through the questions. But as a resource, there are pros and cons. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Make sure that you're comfortable paying back the amount if you were left to do it by yourself. Make sure that you have a strong financial circumstance for you as well. But there are definitely pros and cons for you to consider too. I'm going to switch to this slide while I scroll through the chat and answer some questions that are backlogged here. And then I will hop over into the pre-submitted questions as well, because I know there are a couple I haven't answered just yet. There was one question that was asked that I was holding on, so I apologize for making you wait to get this answer. But the question asked was, do college financial aid offices see all of the information on the FAFSA, or are they only getting your student aid index or some summary result? Kind of all of the above. They're getting what's called an ISIR, ISIR. And so you can look and see what that information contains. You can also look at a student aid report. It'll give you kind of an idea of what's being looked at there. But that's going to include things like your student aid index, your adjusted gross income, and some other information that's going to be on your ISIR. If you have questions about that, you can always talk to a financial aid officer and find out exactly what they're looking at. But the FAFSA is really objective. If you file it, every college is kind of getting the same information, and you send it out to the colleges. You get to select who you send it out to in terms of the colleges. But if you want more details on that, I would just look into an ISIR and just look into what that information is going to contain there. Another question that I got that I kind of held on as well, so I apologize for making you wait for an answer. If a student lives independently of both parents and is above 18, so they don't have a legal guardian, which parent would be the FAFSA contributor? In that case, it would be the parent who provided the most financial support to the student in the last 12 months. So if one parent has gone no contact and the other parent is maybe giving them $100 a month just to help them with groceries, it would be the parent giving them $100 a month for groceries. It's not going to be if the student is a dependent for them anymore. It's just going to be based off of those circumstances. Now, if that student is estranged from their parents because of an abusive situation, for instance, and that's why they're living separately, the school can actually look at that and call those unusual circumstances and make the student provisionally independent. You'll get a blue screen. The college will ask for more documentation and they can make a determination on that. Additionally, if that student is maybe living independently because they were in foster care or homeless maybe when they were 16 or 17, they could also be potentially independent. So there's a little bit more detail and nuance here that we would have to look into, but I'm assuming based on what was given to me that the student has a healthy relationship with their parents and they're just over the age of 18 and they're living separately now. And in that case, it would be the parent that gave them financial support the most in the last 12 months, even if it was just $100, that would be that legal contributor for that student. Got a question about more information for students without social. I linked a resource here. The University of Maryland has a really great resource. I'm sure your counselors can help with that too. But the best tip I can give you, if you are a student without a social, if you are a student who would not be eligible to file the FAFSA for any reason, is connect with a financial aid officer at a school. They are always the best resource for any student because there's a little bit of nuance in certain circumstances, but also a lot of that additional aid that you might receive is either going to come from the state or it's going to come from that college specifically. So they can get you connected with resources and also maybe some support groups, because a lot of times they will have an on-campus group that connects students in similar circumstances too. So always connect with the financial aid office at the school. That's going to be your best course of action there. How do I find out the scholarships we can apply for? So what you're eligible for? Some sites like Going Mary will vet the scholarship. They'll match the scholarships to you. Others don't. So in some cases, you're going to have to kind of sift through the scholarships. Like if you go to your local scholarship listing, you're going to have to see if you're eligible for them one by one. But some scholarship sites like Going Mary will match you to them to help you out and be a little bit more efficient. Does Going Mary cost anything? Nope, it's totally free to use for the parent, the student, the school. It's free for everybody to use, which is really nice. Question was, how can we tell if a scholarship is a scam or not, or if it's actually verified already? So you're going to want to look on the scholarship site and determine and look into if they vet their scholarships. So typically you can Google things like FAFSA, do they vet their scholarships? are there scams, scholarship scams on FAFSA, stuff like that. And I'm just using them as an example. You can do that with Going Merry too, to Going Merry, vet their scholarships, and you'll get results. Basically, you'll be able to see if they do or don't. I know in the case of Going Merry, we do. There are some additional sites that do it as well. A lot of them are scraping it off of the internet. So they're just pulling all of the data. They're not confirming that they're legitimate opportunities. So I always recommend is that if you don't know that that site individually vets every scholarship, go and vet it yourself. The biggest tells are that you don't feel comfortable giving them the information they're asking for, or that they're asking for additional money. It's an old link, it's an outdated application. Maybe it says 2022 on it and now it's 2024. Those types of things can be kind of signals. And if you can, reach out to the scholarship provider and say, hey, is this your application? Just want to double check, want to confirm the information's right before I send it in. They will oftentimes do that for you. And it can also sometimes signal to them that they need to improve their processes too, and hopefully they will. Do students see all the information from the parent that the parent puts on the FAFSA? No, no. Trying to think of what all. Typically, there's a specific piece of data the parent doesn't want to share with the student. It'll be the student's student aid report. So again, if you want to see what specific data is going to be on that, you can. It'll kind of give you a better idea there. But typically when I get this question, it's a parent asking if a student's going to see a specific piece of information. And so I want to make sure I answer correctly. And this is kind of an it depends based on what you're kind of curious about. But it is that student's application. They're not going to like have your social or anything like that the student can then go off and read. So I hope that answers your question. When do you start filing the FAFSA? So if you are a parent of a senior, so class of 2025 senior, you're going to start filing the FAFSA in December, on December 1st, 2024, and you will file the 2025-2026 FAFSA, and you will continue doing that while your student is in school. If you are a parent of a junior, because I know there was quite a few of you that registered, you will file the FAFSA for the first time next year. So October to December of 2025. And you will file the 2026-2027 FAFSA for the first time. Hope that makes it sense. Basically, whatever next year your student will be in school will be the year of the FAFSA that you'll be filing. If you file the 2024-2025 FAFSA as a for your senior this year, it'll give them aid for the summer if they want to go to college over the summer, but it wouldn't give them aid for next fall, for instance. Yes, there will be a recording. Okay, caught up on all the questions. So let me come over here to the questions that were submitted in advance and also answer a question really quickly. All right. Most common student loan repayment timeframe. It's a really great question. Most commonly, we're going to see 10 or 15 years. A lot of people choose to go with shorter terms now because they're trying to minimize the amount of interest that accumulates, because student loans accumulate a lot of student loan interest. A lot of sites will now also have like sliders, so you can kind of play around with that and look at the pros and cons of different things. Ooh, specific suggestions for scholarships for triplets. I don't have a specific recommendation on that front. There are some that are specific for like twins or multiples. My big thing here for you, Stephanie, would be to look at look at the college. If they're all wanting to go to the same school, do a financial aid appeal to the college, because the student aid index no longer factors in how many children are in college at the same time. The EFC, the previous formula that they used, did calculate that in. And so you can actually do a financial aid appeal on those basis, and a college, especially looking at a set of triplets coming to their school, might be very amenable to giving your students additional financial need, calculating additional financial need for them. So I would definitely focus on that. Generally though, what we're going to see in terms of scholarships, even for multiples, we're going to see that merit scholarships and financial need are going to be the two things, which is going to be looking at them as individuals, not as triplets. But there are a couple out there that that you can find. Someone asked what does the FAFSA mean? It stands for the free application for federal student aid. It is not, they also asked like, who gets it? How do I get it? What does it cover? it's not something you get. It's just an application that makes you eligible for a lot of opportunities, including the Pell Grant, scholarships, grants from the colleges, from the state government, from the federal government. So it's just an application. You need to file it so that you are eligible for as many opportunities as possible. That's kind of they asked me to explain it like you were 5. That's what I would tell you is everyone who is a high school senior should file the FAFSA in senior year of high school. And it's just going to make you eligible for more opportunities, for financial aid opportunities. What financial documents do I need to prepare? Generally, as long as the IRS data retrieval process works for you, you're not going to really need a whole bunch. You'll need to know like the current balances of certain accounts, like your checkings and savings, but that's pretty much it. It's just going to pull in directly from your 2023 taxes from the IRS. So it'll save you quite a bit of time. Do you get financial aid for having multiple kids in college at one time? You don't get it for having multiple kids in college, but like I mentioned earlier, you can do a financial aid appeal on those basis. Are there financial aid options for if you don't qualify for the FAFSA? Well, again, I would just stress that you don't qualify or not qualify for the FAFSA. Everyone files it. Everyone qualifies to file it. It's the opportunities that the FAFSA can open the door to, and those individually, which ones do you qualify for? So typically what I see people mean here is I won't qualify to get a Pell Grant. And because I won't qualify for a Pell Grant, what else can I do? You still need to file the FAFSA, even if you don't qualify for the Pell Grant, is what I would say. Just starting the process. Tips for younger students. Have them start framing which college they're going to want to attend around this idea of it's an investment of my time and my money. And then also having them think about making a cost-conscious college list and exploring if they really need to get that 4-year degree or if a 2-year makes more sense. Like, what is their career path? Where do they want to go with it? And what is necessary for that? And how can they maximize their opportunities there? If your parents are divorced and one is more financially responsible, do you have both of the parents file still? No. So if your parents are divorced, then what will happen is the parent who has supported the child the most in the past 12 months, so not over their lifetime, but just simply over the last 12 months, whoever provided the most financial support to that student will be the parent contributor for that student. And then the next question is that parent now remarried? If no, they're the only parent contributor. If yes, how do they file their taxes? If they file their taxes separately, then step parent will also need to be on that FAFSA. If they file them jointly, then they don't need to make an FSA ID. But if parents are divorced, only one of them is putting their info in the FAFSA. It's kind of the short answer, but there's like a longer answer of how you figure out which one that is after that. How do I write a financial aid appeal letter? We showed a video of that earlier, but also lots of templates. We have a template on Going Merry if you would rather do that on pen and paper too. Can I request for merit-based financial aid later if we were not offered merit-based scholarships initially? This is a little bit tougher because typically you're not offered because the student might not qualify for merit aid. It does not hurt to ask though. Generally though, if you're doing a financial aid appeal, you're appealing for any financial aid. So they might offer you merit, they might offer you need-based aid, they might offer you just money for the sake of you asked and they had it and so they gave it to you. So if you do an appeal, it's not necessarily so specific as like you're asking for merit or you're asking for financial need-based financial aid. What's the most efficient way to file the FAFSA? Sit down and do it in one setting, have everyone who needs to do it have an FSA ID set up in advance. You don't need any specific documents ready, and it will be a situation where the student will need their own individual FSA ID if they have not set that up, and then one or potentially both parents might need it depending on the family structure. What mistakes to avoid when applying? Big thing. What I mentioned earlier about the FAFSA tips. For a lot of students, it's just not applying throughout the school year. And so you're missing out on opportunities that are active when you're not looking. And those opportunities are typically ones most students aren't looking for, so they're less competitive. And then obviously picking out where they're going to go to school before they understand their financial circumstances with those colleges, those types of things are some pretty big mistakes. Useful apps for research. Listed some of those earlier. Oh, what is financial aid eligibility based on? Is it based on like GPA and SAT scores, financial status? Kind of all the above. It depends on the specific financial aid. circumstance. So in the case of things like the Pell Grant, it's based on your income and your enrollment level at the school. So if you are a student and you are enrolled at 9 credit hours, you don't actually qualify for your entire Pell Grant. Whereas if you're enrolled in 12 hours or more, you are. Additionally, if you could get some merit aid. So in those cases, it would be looking at maybe GPA, maybe ACT, SAT, could be looking at an essay that you wrote. It could be looking at your athletics, your extracurriculars. There's lots of things that merit can look at. Most need-based aid is going to be looking at that financial need calculation of cost of attendance minus student aid index as well. So lots of different ways you can get financial aid there and qualify. Question, if a kid has a trust, can we still apply for financial aid? Absolutely, you still should. It would just be considered an asset on behalf of that student. Same thing with 529 plans. Those are considered assets for the student. Actually, just got a question. How does a 529 plan affect the FAFSA application? Any 529 plan that is in the name of the parent or student and it is meant to benefit that student will be considered on the FAFSA. But if you have 529 plans for like multiple kids, for instance, brother's 529 plan won't be considered on sister's FAFSA. That's not going to be what they're looking at. It has to be specifically for that student. And a 529 plan that is held by a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle, anyone outside of the parent or the student is not considered on the FAFSA. So if you're maybe a parent, you've got a younger student and you're planning that might be something you want to consider with a financial advisor if you're thinking about making a 529 plan. Requirements for obtaining scholarships to colleges and universities. I hate this answer and I'm so sorry, but it really depends and it varies widely. Some will have progress requirements, so you must complete 24 credit hours before the end of this academic school year. Others will have GPA requirements for entry, but not ongoing. Some will have them that they're ongoing. Some will have, you must complete these specific courses. So it really depends on the scholarship provider and the scholarship specifications. They're always going to list that out for you. So just make sure you read it. It's not like some fine print or anything, but if you're ever curious or concerned, always reach out to the college and ask them, and they'll be able to help guide you through that, or the scholarship provider if it's an external scholarship. With the timing lag of financial documents being 2023 taxes and the start of college being fall 2025, how do we explain a change in our financial situation, like the loss of a job? You would just do a financial aid appeal. And if you know those circumstances apply to you, go ahead and talk to the college financial aid office. Go ahead and get connected, find out what that's going to look like, who you should address it with, because they're so lovely and they're so willing to help, and they really do want to just do the best that they can. Do understand that when you do an appeal, if you have circumstances that are, from like 4 years ago, they're not necessarily going to consider that. But if it's from the last year, they might consider that. And it is a request, obviously. They're not required to consider make a professional judgment in your favor, but they can absolutely consider it for you. How does financial aid work for the middle class? We make enough to live comfortably, but paying for university will strain our budget significantly. Have a really frank conversation with your student about what that's going to look like, what you're able to support them with, and what they need to find in terms of financial aid. I would also, that cost-conscious college list is going to play a really big role in making sure they have offers to consider, and that they have variety there, that you're not looking at just every college that your student wants to go to has a $15,000 annual gap. You want to be having those options available to them. Savings, there's also tuition plans. Some colleges will offer it where you can do payment plans. So like instead of paying it all in one lump sum, you can pay it over the course of the semester. If you're ever concerned about that too, reach out to the college and they can connect you with their resources. Oh, apply to early decision to a school and decisions come out December 15th. Will my financial aid package also be out by then, or will it come at a later time? It depends. Every college does it a little differently with that. The big thing about early decision, early action, if you applied, if you do get accepted, which I hope you do, because I'm sure that's the college you really want to attend. If you receive a disappointing financial aid offer, know that the part of the agreement with early decision is that you're saying that you'll deny all other acceptances if you get admitted. So if you get that financial aid offer and you immediately realize there's no way, you file an appeal and they're not budging, then you can rescind your decision to go to the school, but it's a little bit complicated. So make sure you're aware of your options there. You still do have the ability to do a financial aid appeal if you get a disappointing offer. You just have limited reasons for an appeal as compared to someone who has more schools that they're able to consider. But if you ever get into that situation, always ask. Financial aid offices, again, are really great resources for you. You can reach out to us and ask. We'll answer your questions too. But unfortunately, it does depend on when you will get those financial aid offer letters. Every school is a little bit different. More commonly with like regular decision schools, we give the range of January through March or April. I expect that financial aid offer letters might be delayed again this year because the FAFSA doesn't open until December 1st. So I would say probably January, but if they are requiring a CSS profile, it could not be delayed at all. They might be able to give you a provisional offer then. Lots of questions about appeals. So glad you guys are aware of that as an option. A lot of students and parents aren't, so I'm really glad to hear that. Are there any paid companies that will find and apply to scholarships for your student? There are. There's also a question for me to give a recommendation. I will not give a recommendation because you're generally going to be hiring a service and you're going to want to do your research. Some of these are more tailored, like they're specifically supporting students that want to go to Ivy League schools, or they specifically want to go to schools in the Southern US, whatever. They're specifically focused on students that are in athletics and things like that. So you're going to want to do your research. Make sure you ask them. Some services are better than others. Some people are better than others. Do your research. Generally, you're going to be looking at individual education consultants, IECs, and you'll only be paying for part of their service because they actually will consult your student on like how to apply and how to interview for colleges and stuff like that too. So ask questions. It can be quite expensive, but they are out there. And again, some are better than others. There are some that are absolutely lovely, and there are some that I know that I've had students tell me that they did not help in any way. So just do your research, ask around for reviews, ask around for recommendations. A lot of times you might have a peer or a colleague that might know of one that they would recommend. Are you more likely to get accepted if you are not asking for financial aid? Not necessarily. Some schools are what we call need blind, others are not. So it just really depends, but generally, no. And you should always ask for financial aid. You really should. If you qualify for it, if you would qualify for it, you should ask for aid. For schools that cover 100% of demonstrated aid, does it still apply for early decision students? Yes, it does. It should. Obviously there's an it depends but for those circumstances, it should. The only exception I would carve out there is in the case of covering 100% of demonstrated need. Do they promise to do it with or without loans? And then if they have like an income limit. So sometimes a school will say, we meet 100% of financial need for students whose families have an AGI of $120,000 or less. So in those cases, if you make over $120,000, you wouldn't qualify for that promise that they are making. So, but if they're making it to their students, then it should still qualify for early decision students. But it's just, early decision just limits options for appeal is really the big thing there, is what I would say. Okay. I think I'm caught up. I'm going to make it so that you can ask questions out loud because I know that sometimes can be easier. And I will keep monitoring the chat, but does anyone have a question that they would like to ask out loud before we wrap up tonight? Okay. Well, if not, I will just say thank you so much for your time today. Lots of really great questions. I hope that helped with all the information. If you do have a question that comes up later, feel free to reach out to me or reach out to support@goingmerry.com. We're always here to answer questions. Obviously, your counselor is as well. And financial aid offices are also a really, really great resource. But if you need anything from me, feel free to reach out. After this meeting wraps, I will start downloading the recording from Zoom. It takes a few hours typically. But if you registered for the meeting, it will send you a follow-up email with the recording and the slide deck. I will also send a link over to the counselor, and then they will share that out for you as well. So if you didn't register for some reason, or you used a bad email, whatever, they'll send that out to you. They'll have it as a resource too. But if you have anything that you need from me, feel free to reach out anytime. Thank y'all so much, and I hope you have a really great evening.